Hi, friends. Welcome to the Artist Blend.
Today we're going to talk about storytelling, what makes good storytelling and bad storytelling, and what stories are worth telling.
Yeah, so grab your mug.
And let's get talking.
So, everyone, this is my fiancée, Isabel Webb, and we are having her as a guest. She is a book talker. That's a weird verbiage, but it is what book talker.
Book talker.
Hi. Yes, so I post videos daily, mostly daily, on Book Talk, just talking about books, reviewing books, hauling books, recommending books, not recommending books, anything and everything.
That's the bad storytelling.
Yeah. And I obviously read profusely. I am a huge ingester of stories, I guess you could say, although it's kind of gross.
I ingest books. I mean, you do read them pretty quick,
Yeah,
so I
I
guess
do
you
read
ingest them.
quick.
That must be how
I
you do
do.
it.
What have you eaten today? 400 pages, thank you.
And a granola bar.
And since we're talking about storytelling today, we figured that who better to talk about stories and structure than someone who ingests story structures constantly.
You'll have to put that in your TikTok description now.
Like
I ingest
an
books.
ingester of stories.
You've heard of investors. Well, get ready for it.
These investors, hey, this podcast needs some ingesters. Who wants to
That's
join
true.
us?
So, speaking of, if you've listened to our first two episodes, we first had two wonderful blends from a coffee company called Carver Coffee. And if you want to check them out, you can check them out at carvercoffee.com with our affiliate link, which is carvercoffee.com/theartistblend.
It's
right?
numbers
Or
and
just-
letters, I think.
Okay, great.
So we'll put it in the show notes. But also there's a coupon code that you
Great.
can get. It's the Artist's Blend. And you'll get 10% off, which is
Ooh.
great. Who doesn't want 10% off coffee?
Yes.
Today's
especially-
coffee, though, is... I'm going to crinkle it.
The ASMR. in all of us.
It's Blue Bottle coffee. Wait, what did you say?
I said, are you listening? Are you ready?
Not
It's
anymore.
a new
Click.
career.
But it's Blue Bottle Coffee. It's their bold blend. It's... I won't say anything yet. Good vibes, though.
We'll get good vibes so far.
We'll get there
so.
at the end. We'll talk
Yeah.
about it.
It's all good.
So
But yeah.
we each have our own little approach, a little argument, I guess, if you will, about storytelling that we each have to talk. Austin, do you want to go?
Sure, I can. So
Cool.
for those of us who can't see what I'm looking at, because all three of us can, we'll put it in the show notes. This is a little graph picture diagram that I found on the National Geographic. Yeah, nationalgeographic.org, and it's the elements of storytelling. So I found this interesting because all three of us are actors, performers, writers, directors, however you want to classify us. And within that, we have a decent grasp of what storytelling is. We're not experts, but for those who don't, this is a good avenue to basically say, oh, okay, I never thought of it that way. But it says all good stories and images start with an idea. And the first question you ask is, what is your question? Is something happening to your community that needs awareness? I think this is actually talking about like communal needs of storytelling. Like if there's a need, if you need to get the word out about something, this is that kind of storytelling. But it can kind of go into any storytelling, really, if you think about it. Is there an issue? This one attains more to theatrical or books. It's like, is there an issue or an event that needs the story told?
Big picture.
Yeah, the big picture
Yeah.
of it all. And use your question as a starting point to give focus and structure to your story, which I've found kind of interesting. It's sort of scientific. And the second one is acquire information and analyze data, or data for whoever wants to say it either way. And it says that it's essential to educate yourself on your subject, which, yes, it is.
It's so interesting that already, like, the first two big things are so intellectual.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is talking about whether it's for films or books or interviews or whatever it is, documentaries. It's interesting that
It's crazy.
You think about it, even with
I was not expecting this.
No.
Approach.
Even with,
It's
like,
so interesting.
fiction, like if you're setting your story in a real place, you have to do research on that place. You have to do research on the culture. You have to do research on things that you wouldn't expect.
Unless you're
to.
J.R.R. Tolkien, who just creates his own place.
Yeah,
But
you can do that.
we could say, no, I don't like research. Let me just spend hours and hours creating my own world. Thank
That sounds like
you.
something I would do.
where is he? He's looking at a tree. It's fine. Then it says just like do interviews, do as much research as you can, visit libraries, review compelling visuals such as photographs and films. I would also say talking to people who might be a little bit more of an expert in the field, especially when it comes to like stage adaptations. If you're writing a story about a character, for example, who you don't know anything about, whether that they have a disability, whether they have a disease, whether they have anxiety or anything like that. If you don't suffer or have any of those, you don't need to write about it without consulting and doing as much research as you can, so you can honor the respect with it.
Like the argument of like whose story is it to be told?
Correct.
Who has the right to tell the story, which I think we're becoming more aware of.
I hope, that's my
progress.
hope, and I see it more and more, but
Especially on Book Talk, that's a big conversation on Book Talk, is like, is it okay for these people to be telling these stories? Is it okay for us to read stories? Like, let's say, for example, like, is it okay for us to read stories about Black people by a white author? Like, these conversations are happening.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's very, very interesting.
It
It's
is.
a very prominent topic on
And it's
Book
the same
I love it.
conversations happening in the theater world.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, you have Ragtime, which was Flaherty and Aaron's, two white people who
Yep.
wrote the story about culture and oppression and so and that's happening all over. Like Color Purple, when it was on Broadway, it was produced by directed by a white man, and it was wonderfully done. But then just it's such a weird
kinda like-
fine line that you have to.
Yeah.
I like that we're having these conversations though.
True. Me too.
It's really cool. In all industries, which I wasn't aware of. That Book Talk
Exactly.
is also
Yeah.
specifically TikTok, book world.
Yeah, yeah.
Conversation. Not the book world at large. Just
no,
book
no,
talk.
No,
yes. But
Just
for example-
Isabel's followers.
Yes, just hers. But for her followers or future followers, Isabel's actually doing a challenge this month where she does a TBR, to be read, and she is reading nothing but either Black stories or stories by Black authors for Black History Month, and I think that's
Yeah.
really, really honorable, and I love it. So
That's
good
cool.
job.
Love that.
I love her. Anyways, to number 3, it's as you shape and direct your story to be finished to a finished form, do not be surprised if new questions arise and build on your story. Which when I skimmed this before I sent it to anybody, I was like, I never thought about that. But even within that, as you said, very intellectually looking at it this way, you're gonna get more questions. You're gonna be like, wait, I didn't even think or consider that, but I've got to cover it now. And then organize your thoughts and information. As someone who has OCD, that is horrifying.
As someone who's type B, that is horrifying.
Exactly. Yeah.
As someone who's type A, I love it.
All three.
All three
corners
with
of
the triangle. Yes. And we were formed. No. And then it's knowing ahead of time what you need to do for your project means a smoother creative process. And I think that that almost could be put at number 1 as a warning necessary. It's like, hey, you need to be aware this is going to happen. But
Yeah. To comment on that in particular, I love that statement because in directing courses that I've taken and also some books that I've read on directing, there's this rule, which is that you will never know how to correctly direct something until it's opened. You're never going to know. Directing for the stage, or I guess for film too, it could qualify. Like, you're never going to know
Any
how to
of
do
it,
it perfectly
yes.
until it's done. And so I feel like, yes, it's good to try and perceive ahead of time what you need to do to ensure a smooth process. But every creative process is going to have bumps because we can't know how to direct it well or how to write it well or how to perform it well until we're in it. We're doing it.
it's true.
And so I love that it's saying that, like, hey, the smoother, the more you know ahead of time and the more you prep, yes, it's going to be smoother. But also, I feel like it's important to note that it will never be completely smooth. It's never going to be a freshly paved road. It's always going to be chunky.
Chunky. Ooh, chunky.
It's going to be
I love
chunky.
that.
We all 3 took the same beginning directing class, and I was in my time there, that was the only class that I was able to do, but I love directing. it just something about it clicks in my mind, but also I'm still a beginner. But what I loved is this is a side note, I had got a hat for myself. And what I really loved about the book that you're referencing, Easton, is there's a point in it when it says you don't have full control. You may be the director, but you don't have full control. And I loved that.
That is so true.
So I treated myself to a hat. It's a Mickey Mouse hat. And I wear it when I'm only directing because I like to be, okay, this is my director's hat. When I'm wearing it, that's what it is. And I can take it off and be myself. But what's funny is when I bought the hat, it doesn't stay tight. Like it never stays tight. So it's constantly reminding me that I'm not in control. Like, because I'm having to shift it. I'm having to like move it around and things like that.
So
and I'm
cool.
like,
This
why?
is true. Like he said this when he bought it. Like he's not just like
I was
pulling this
like,
up.
no, I was like, this
Yeah.
is crazy. I love it.
Yeah.
But anyways, number 4, it says embrace revisions. You're going to rewrite. You're going to redo.
That is also so true for every aspect of art. Like, I mean, I just directed a play, and speaking of directing, and I had it exactly how I wanted it, planned out in my script. And then when we got to reviewing, we were making revisions. We were changing things based on who was there that day or what works on the set and what doesn't. And it was really stressful at first to change what I had really thoroughly planned out. But,
It happens.
it happened.
Yeah.
Revisions are life.
Yeah.
But let's see. Rarely does someone get his or her story completely right at the first time around. And sometimes a story may head in a new direction that is even better. I like that. Revisions help to fine-tune and add polish to your final product. When revising, be sure to keep the focus on the main point you're trying to make and stick to a schedule so you don't end up tinkering forever. Excuse me. It looks like an L. Yeah, I like that. I mean, there's no telling how many shows, to turn to Broadway, for example, there's no telling how many shows that are on the stage now, how long they were in workshops, how long they got rewritten, how long the revision process was.
Very beginning, yeah.
Which is interesting because I don't think that's ever talked about necessarily.
Yeah. And one other big aspect of that is, again, staying in the world of theater, is taking shows from New York to tour or licensing. Like things like Shrek has completely different songs. I'm doing a production of Addams Family right now in Orlando, and the entire plot changed. They had
really?
multiple songs that were taken out, new songs that were written, or I guess put back in that Andrew Lippa had already written, but they didn't make it. But the motivations for characters are completely different. On Broadway, it's all about Morticia feeling old and that she's not desirable anymore, and Gomez is trying to convince her that she is, while also dealing with everything else. But in the licensed version, it's all about keeping secrets and how Morticia knows that Gomez is hiding something, and she won't stand for that. And that's her. And then he lied. And then that's her crisis moment later on.
But both
it
work.
totally changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it.
And
But both stay true to the
revisions are
character.
constant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also
Interesting.
the opening number was completely different in Chicago. It was it was called
I remember.
Clandango, and it was like this dance to celebrate Wednesday's turning 18 and like she's a woman now, and that started the show. Versus When You're in Adams, which is what was opened in New York and is still licensed. So it's like it's always changing. Always,
Wow.
even once a show like opens, or even once a film is playing, and I
And
guess
even
you
if
can
shows
go
closes,
back and
they
even if show
just
closes,
reopen.
yeah.
I remember when I
Yeah.
went to see Mean Girls on the tour, I was like, what are the words? These are not, what are these words? But
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them were for the better, but it's so funny to experience that.
We'll wrap up because there's only one more point on here. But for example, with books to movies, which is on an upcoming episode of like books, movies, and musicals, people see movies all the time and they're like, it didn't follow the book's plot. I'm like, okay, well, I know you do. It's okay. And it's just the difference. It's a revision because it's by two different artists.
It's a different medium.
It's a different medium and everything.
Yeah.
So
So some
interesting.
things have to change.
Yeah. Something.
Not everything should all the time.
No.
And sometimes people go too far, I think.
Order of
But yeah,
Yes.
some
It's
things
okay.
have to change.
Exactly. And then the last point is number 5, take action. Who needs to see your story? Consider your audience when coming up with a presentation strategy, which is nice because, I mean, even with this podcast, we sat down and had to consider who we want to reach. And with movies, you have to rate it to a certain demographic. You have to have it available to all ages or certain ages or no ages or whatever kind of film it is. With books, it has to do with the genre, not necessarily.
Like there's like YA, which is young adult. There's new adult now, which is a new genre, which is kind of like college age. It's usually a little more kind of like not safe for work.
Spicy.
Yeah, spicy books. There's adult, there's middle grade, children's, and people of all ages read all genres. Like whether children should be reading adult books, they do. Adults read children's books. It's, you know, it's all over the place, but you do have to know what your main audience is.
Yeah,
I like that. I mean, with shows in theater, you have to too. It's also important to like who you want to hear this message, but who the message may be for as well.
Yeah,
you have to take into consideration. But that's the points on this graph. If anybody wants to look at it again, it'll be in the show notes. I found it interesting, and it really opened, I think, all of our minds to being like, yeah, it is that way. We don't think of the step by step process all the time. I mean, it's just like, I read an article one time that it was like, if you had to describe how to get out of bed, you might be like, I don't do that every morning, but you do. It's like you open your eyes, you sit up, you scroll on your phone, you turn your legs off of the side of the bed, you stand up, you walk over. It's like step by step. You're like, this is daunting, but there it is. So,
two final thoughts on this graphic. One is that. Can you hear that?
Barely.
Sorry, everybody.
It's like a nice
pressure
chord.
washing the street.
It's like a nice chord.
It chose
it's fine.
right now to start.
Music
Great.
of the world.
Great, love it. One is that all of these things can and will be out of order, and that like there is no direct path, and don't ever feel like you're stuck following a certain path because you'll jump around and go back to other things and start somewhere else. And the other thing is that I disagree with number one, starting with a question. I don't know if that's specifically for crafting, like writing a story in a certain medium, but for performers, we always go back to objectives and wants and what we need the character. But I feel like all good stories start that way. Like in our playwriting class that I took in a book, it all started with what is who wants what.
Yep.
And I feel like that has to be the structure, or that's the beginning of any story, is somebody has to want something. So starting there, and then I feel like a question will arise once you craft the story of, like for example, in the book, it was, I can't remember. I'll put it in the show notes what book this was on for playwriting, because I don't want to take someone's stuff. But it was Mike and Joe, and Mike wanted a glass of water. That's the one. But Joe also wanted that same glass of water. That's the conflict. And so then you explore from there, how does he get there? What tactics did they use to convince the other one to let them have the water, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the question that could arise is, what is thirst? Why do we thirst? Why do we have to thirst? You know, and
It's true.
Obviously that's a super simplified concept, but if you blare that out into some mass incredible story, that question can arise from any good story. So I think that's something to think about too, is that it doesn't have to start necessarily with a question. It can just be the idea. Doesn't have to be a question. It can be a want or a need.
On your point of that, in you talking about it, I looked at question 1, and on this chart, there's the line above says all good stories and images start with an idea, and idea is in bold.
Yeah,
that should be. I agree with you. That should have been number 1, not what is your question.
What is your idea?
Like, because you could have an idea and then want to take action, and then you find questions along the way. You get data.
I feel like when you start with a question, it also kind of makes your process muddy. If you're starting off with like a wonky foundation,
I feel that. Makes sense.
Instead of a solid idea, like I know this is what I want to write or perform, or this is what I know I want my idea to be, and then you can build off of that and have questions off
Makes
of
sense.
that.
Yeah.
What a beautiful segue into Isabel's portion of talking about storytelling. So take it away, hun.
Okay, I don't
Book
have a
expert.
graph.
The book.
I feel like when I'm reading or saying a play or doing a play, my main goal is to feel empathy. Like, I feel like when I'm digesting a story, I want to feel for the characters, whether that's positive or negative, but I also want to find a way to connect with them, even if I really don't like the character. Like, I feel like good storytelling to me is making me feel for at least one or two of the main characters. And I love stories especially that make you feel for the villain, like Thanos in Marvel. Like I love feeling for someone that I have just despised the whole story, and then feeling that
Severus Snape.
Yes, like feeling the humanness in them, and like understanding that, you know, being able to feel empathy for
We have no empathy for Umbridge.
no.
None at all.
No.
None.
None at all. I mean, maybe she takes care of her cats.
No, not even. She puts them in dishes.
That's true.
Her cats deserve better. I will
That's
take
True,
them
they
for
do.
her.
They sure do.
I want a wall like that with cats on dishes.
Yes.
Give me a
We'll
wall
make it
with
happen.
cat dishes, please.
We'll make it happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Go thrifting. It'll be
that's
fine.
that's what, in just a general sense, good storytelling is to me, is making me feel for the characters.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how we're talking about good storytelling versus bad storytelling. When I think of books and bad storytelling, I get really frustrated when there's plot holes. I'm a very mathematical thinker, so if I'm like, this doesn't make sense, or, you know, what used to bother me is typos, but then I was knowledged. I was taught that that's not the author's fault, it's the editor's fault, so I stopped taking off star ratings for that because that's not fair to the author. But I did.
There was a
I
typo.
If
3
there were like
stars.
3 or more type, no, I literally used to do that because that's how, like, you know, analytical I am. But if there's a plot hole or if something doesn't make sense, or I'm like, you said they were sitting on the right side of the table and now it sounds like they're sitting on the left side, that's when I start taking myself out of the story. And so
Yeah.
bad storytelling for me is just generally like a weak plot and not a good sense of what you were writing about, which kind of goes back to the graph, is if they haven't taken their time and done their research, you can tell when a book was written very quickly or where there wasn't a lot of time and thought put into it, and I can still be entertained by it and still enjoy myself, but that doesn't feel like good storytelling to me.
You've also talked about, because she's constantly telling me about the books that she reads, and I love it. Because even in her telling me, I don't get ruined. The story doesn't get ruined.
I don't spoil usually.
Yeah, you don't spoil it easily or usually.
Sometimes I will.
But you talk about sometimes with the voice, like the narrator of the book, not necessarily if it was an audiobook or anything like that, but the author's voice.
Yeah.
You talk about that playing an important role often.
Yes.
And sometimes you're like, I don't like this book because I don't like the
don't like
author's
the
voice.
narrator.
Like, I don't like what I hear in my head.
So I just read The Catcher in the Rye, which is a classic, and I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about that book, and I very much disliked it, but it wasn't because of the narrator's voice. I kind of loved his kind of cynical but also just very like relatable voice, but it was first of all, it's a very problematic book, which is why I rated it so low. But also, I just a lot of the time I would love the way he talks, but what he talked about I didn't like. So sometimes it depends not just on if I like the narrator, but it also depends on what they're saying. And
Makes sense.
you know, yeah, it's an example of that.
Yeah.
Because I feel like audiobooks give me a whole different perspective of a story, because there's just something different about reading it in your own head and hearing someone else say it. Sorry.
Yeah.
'cause
Me in
it
the head.
just even like intonation and like tone of voice can change the way you perceive a story completely.
Yeah.
A lot of people will say, especially on Book Talk, like, I loved this book, but I hated the audiobook. Or I loved the audiobook, but I picked up the book and I didn't really like it as much. So
Yeah, I feel like that's similar to reading the book or watching the movie. You have certain things told to you and dictated to you versus complete imagination based on the words on the page. And I feel like audiobooks are like a mini version of that. Like they're dictating what things should sound like and what things should feel like based on the tone of their voice and what mood they create. And
I was going to say that because some people could be excellent readers, but they may have too high a voice, and people are like, no, it's too shrill. I don't want to listen to that. Or it's off-putting enough.
they have the wrong like idea of the character, or they're putting the wrong like emphasis even on certain things and certain.
Or if it's like a multi-character story, every character has the same voice, so the reader or listener gets confused of who's talking.
Yeah.
So this is like literal storytelling. Like how do you actually tell out loud a story?
Exactly.
I was listening to a podcast a couple months ago, and it looked fascinating to me. I was so excited. I started listening to it, and I was like, I cannot stand this lady's voice. It was like, she's a great writer. She wrote these wonderful stories and really cool things. But first off, just like the tone of her voice was just so I don't have anything against like Shrill. I can do Shrill, whatever. Like give me Bernadette Peters all day. But it was just something about like where she was resonating was just like grating against my soul. I don't know. And then, but also she ended her sentences the same way every single time. It was like a news reporter on steroids gone bad.
Oh no.
It was just like,
oh no.
Oh, it was so repetitive and robotic. I just couldn't do it. And I hated it because I was so excited about that podcast.
But here we go. Once again. And now
yes, that's correct.
That is the way.
I feel like that's what I would want from like a meditation app. Or like, you know, something
You're now
to
breathing
calm
in.
you.
Yes. And breathe out.
It's not supposed to like draw you
You'd be
in.
good
You
at that,
don't
Austin.
Thank you. Cool. All right, Easton, you want to go into what is good and bad storytelling? Also, bad storytelling, I'm out of coffee. This is a horrible, horrible thing.
I still have some, but it's cold.
Oh, thank you.
No.
So looking at storytelling, obviously I don't want to go in saying one thing is bad, one thing is good. It's all subjective.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think there are a few things that are, for the most part, objective in storytelling.
Yeah.
So I was like, started with a question. I was like, what makes a story good or bad? And so I started with like listing out bad stories sometimes. Not to like name anything in particular, but like one thing is a lot of times like elementary school pageant plays and middle school musicals, which sometimes are incredible, but a lot of the time they're in the middle of nowhere places with people that don't necessarily know how to run them well, and the kids may have so much talent, but it's just bad quality.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what makes one aspect of bad storytelling is quality. Like, you want to see a polished product. You don't want to see typos. You don't want to have narrators in the audiobook that grate your soul with their voice, you know? You want quality. So that's like one aspect of it. Another aspect... Sorry, Hallmark. But Hallmark movies, some people love them because of the nostalgia that they feel or the emotions, whatever. But I can't stand them because they're predictable. And I think one aspect of a good story is unpredictability. No, go ahead.
No, he's looking at me, but I watch them because they are predictable, and I'll turn them on if I want something for just like just for pure like, you know.
Yeah.
Just to have something that I know.
Yeah.
Like I know this is gonna happen.
Subjective. It's all subjective. Like
I wouldn't
for some
say that's
people,
good
that predictability
storytelling.
is a comfort. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's depends on the person, but for me, like predictability is really important, or a lack of predictability. And sometimes you do want like the hero saves the day, gets the girl, whatever. Great. Yeah. That's awesome. Love that. But
at Marvel,
there has to be a sense of urgency of are they really going to win?
Yeah.
Because if you know the ending from the beginning, why pick up the book or the show or the movie, you know? So that's another aspect. So bad quality, predictability. I was scrolling through Netflix. I was deep in the throes of Netflix.
Oh, no.
Like, I was getting titles I've never seen or heard of that were years and years old
English
with
dubbed.
like 0 stars, like crazy. And I won't name the real title. I'm going to come up with a fake title for this because I don't want to throw the creators under the bus. But it was
the
like
reverse.
The Littlest Turnip.
Okay.
And it was this kids animated movie, and I was like, this kind of looks cute. I'll see what this is about. So I click on it, and like 30 seconds in, I'm just distraught because it is some of the worst voice acting, the worst animate. Like, it looks like it was animated in like the late 90s when we were first getting computers, but it was like 5 years ago, and I was like, okay,
what's happening?
It just didn't have much money, and it was just like, but also as I kept watching, I was like, this is a horrible story. It's not worth telling because one, it had been told so many times. Two, it was predictable where they were going, and it was bad quality. And so, like, I hate to say that some stories aren't worth telling, but again, subjective. But sometimes stories they've been told a million times, or this exact message has been beaten over the head culturally to this generation of people. And not that the story is any less important, but sometimes cultures need certain stories, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
If you're going to repeat something, you have to add something new to it. You have to put something that hasn't been done.
And
yes,
to touch on that point, there's the newest stop animation claymation Pinocchio that's on Netflix
Yeah.
right now
Yeah.
is totally
Oh
different
yeah, that's awesome.
than
That's what I've heard.
I haven't,
love
I
it.
haven't seen it yet, but what I know about it is it's totally different from any Pinocchio that we know, and a lot of people are seeing it and watching the whole thing, but they're fighting it the whole time because they're like, this isn't what I know, this isn't what I'm used to. But then by the end, they're like, this was amazing.
And it's so
Yeah.
interesting to me when people like with Disney remakes when they're like, oh, they changed this. It makes me so mad. That's actually like the one thing that I like about the remakes is I'm like, ooh, they changed it up. But everyone's like, this is not the exact story that I know, which
Yeah.
is so interesting. Like, why would you want that?
Who knows?
That's another aspect of it too. Of like, are you reimagining or are you reproducing?
Yeah,
And sometimes reproductions just aren't good.
it happens.
Yeah.
or worth it. There's not a, I wrote in my notes, there's not a new take. Like if you're going to tell a story that's been told, give us a new take. Give us
Yeah.
something different. So flipping all of that on its head, good storytelling for me is high quality. It's like a polished product. They know how to tell the story well. It's unpredictable, and because it's unpredictable, it's engaging. I'm wanting to know what's going to happen.
You and I are very similar on that because, like,
Yeah.
when it comes to a movie, she can attest. I'm sitting there all the time watching any film, and I'm like, this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. I know this is gonna happen. Like, and I always usually get it right. But if something
Yeah.
throws me off,
Scream.
Yeah.
Scream did. Like, if something throws me off, I'm like, wait, I could.
That's why I love
so
M. Night
exciting.
Shyamalan. Like,
Yes.
I
Yes.
adore like his was it Old? Is that the
Oh,
name
I
of the movie that
loved
came out?
Old. You haven't seen it.
I
I haven't seen it yet.
adored
I
Old.
love that movie.
You will love Old if you.
I'm so excited.
Like to not know what's happening.
Yes,
I
I do.
A lot of people said the movie was poo poo compared
Well,
to his previous
I poo-poo
ones,
on
but
them.
I loved it. You
I
what?
did too. I said I poo poo on them.
Yeah,
Poo-poo on you.
I poo poo on you. But yeah, to I guess wrap up my thoughts, like stories that are worth telling have those things, but also they have some sort of message, they have some sort of call to action, they have some emotional high, so they carry your emotions through because emotions are so much a part of storytelling. Like we want to feel things when we like Isabel, you were just saying, like that's you want to read books that you feel things for the
Yeah.
characters or for the situations, and so like stories that give us emotional highs and lows and have some sort of message and a call to action, because I think stories are sometimes all you want is just to feel, and that's
Yeah.
great, but then sometimes stories can/should be used to fire people up about something.
Totally.
Stories serve a bunch of different purposes culturally,
do.
to entertain,
Yeah.
to inform, to educate, to inspire. There's so many
Yeah.
different. It's like I'm writing an essay in English lit class. Like, what is your
In
it was like,
conclusion.
what's the purpose of your essay? To inspire, to inform, to educate, like whatever,
Yes.
you know, those things.
I was taught in middle school you should always have your last paragraph as either in conclusion or to conclude.
I think everybody was.
And I hated it.
Conclude. Sorry,
conclude.
ChatGPT, tell me a better way to close out my conclusion.
I watched a video
Yeah.
of someone who got AI to recommend him books, and he was like obsessed with the books that was chosen. for him.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very passionate about stories in general just because I think it inspires empathy in people and that it helps us to understand other people's lives, and it also just helps us understand our own thoughts on the world, you know, whether we agree with a story or not.
And form them. Like,
Yeah.
if it's not something we agree with, we at least form an
Yeah.
opinion at that point.
Exactly.
But-
I'm never worried that stories are going to disappear because we have to have them. Like they're a necessity.
Yeah. I saw a T-shirt the other day that said, before you... I'm going to say it wrong, but it's the general idea. It says, before you form, inform. Like, before you form an opinion, become informed. And I was like,
Oh, like be informed.
yeah. Be
I was
informed.
gonna say
Yeah.
that's maybe
No.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't say anything before you know.
Yes. I do that a lot. I'll just throw out words. It's fine.
Yeah, you'll just like
Yeah.
try something.
I'll be like, is this right?
But I love it. I'm like, that's really bold.
I've had
I like that.
I've had an apostrophe.
But also not.
Speaking of bold, yeah.
Oh, so good.
Bold blend.
Good
That was
segue.
a wonderful segue.
Good
I'm proud
segue,
of
Sarah.
that.
Well done. And the Blue Bottle Award goes to...
So you immediately, Austin, said, "Okay, wait, this coffee. Tell me what you're thinking about this coffee."
It's so good.
Yeah.
I love the subtle note. Remind me of the notes that are on the bag, because I was trying to
it's
remember.
dark chocolate, hazelnut, and marshmallow,
Okay, I got the hazelnut.
which definitely
I
came
got-
through.
I got the milkiness from the marshmallow, which is weird.
Yeah.
Because marshmallow isn't necessarily milk, but I loved it. It's sweet but deep, and I know
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense, but
Yeah.
we've had a lot of dark roasts on the podcast so far, and this was a semi medium, and it was so good. I love a medium roast, anyways.
I loved it. I prefer. I tend to. I can enjoy like a fruity coffee, but I prefer like things like this.
Yes.
Oh,
it's so good.
It was really great. I definitely felt the marshmallow. I didn't get as much hazelnut, but I got like, I don't know, it was like fluffy. I could taste fluff, sweet fluff.
It reminds me of dark chocolate in general because it was like the bitterness of coffee, but sweet as well, which is why I love dark chocolate.
I'm usually one, like for a long time with K-Pods, she got me an advent calendar that had a different K-Pod every day.
Yes, me too.
And it was wonderful, but I found that I didn't enjoy the syrupiness of some flavorings. And I'm like, this, I don't like that. I don't know why. I love notes. You would.
It just tastes super artificial.
Yes, because I hated it.
Which is, it's chemicals powdered, you know?
But that's why we do the beans that we do.
Yes.
And on that note, let us wrap up this episode because we love to talk and we could talk for hours. Maybe one day we'll do it live.
But yeah, if you have any coffee recs or if you're a roaster, let us know.
Reach out.
We'll send you our little media kit and we can chat.
Let's become brewskis. I don't know.
Yeah. We'll become brewskis. That's fun. I like that.
To remind anybody of our first two blends and our affiliation with them, if you want 10% off their coffee, they are, remind me who they are?
Carver Coffee / Carver Trading Company. They offer teas now, so they're branding themselves more as Carver Trading Company. But you can still go to carvercoffee.com. It's the same URL.
Cool. And our affiliate is The Artists Blend. That's TheArtistsBlend. Cool.
Yeah.
It's almost a song.
And we'll put the link in the show notes too, and you'll get 10% off, which is great. And it's inexpensive too for the quality, especially for the quality.
I used up the last of the beans that I had from it, and it was
R.I.P.
Just such. I know R.I.P. Maybe again. Who knows? They got other blends. We'll find them. So. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave us some reviews wherever you find us and however you can. Because we want to know what we're doing. We want to know what you guys like and whether we're doing good. And speaking of good, just always remember to be good beans and drink good beans.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And go follow Isabel Marie on TikTok.
Is reads a lot. IZREADSALOT.
That's a mouthful right there.
The Artists Blend theme music was written and produced by Christopher and Sarah Bailey of Well Wishes Productions, a Nashville-based boutique production company specializing in multimedia production, live event contracting, studio, and live vocals. Find Incognita's infamous adventures on Amazon Prime and its soundtrack on all digital platforms.